Alina could still feel the heat of July radiating from the asphalt as she trailed behind the lawyer. The man's leather shoes clicked against the cracked pavement of a deserted amusement park. Rusted turnstiles, deflated balloons, and peeling posters of cartoonish mascots lined the entrance. She tried to remember the last time she visited this place, a fleeting childhood memory of scattered laughter and pastel colors, but time had warped those recollections. Now it felt like a graveyard for childhood dreams. She never expected to inherit anything from her estranged Uncle Silas. Yet here she stood, keys in hand, the official owner of Starcrest Amusement Park. A swirl of conflicting emotions, reluctance, curiosity, and an undeniable sense of dread tiptoed through her mind. The park had not seen visitors in over a decade. Everything about it spoke of ruin, half-demolished rides, silent concession stands, and an air thick with forgotten echo. "I can't figure out why he left you this place," the lawyer said, glancing at her from beneath perspiring brows. "Your uncle never mentioned you in any will before." His voice was strained, obviously unnerved by the eerie emptiness. Elena could offer no explanation. She had only known her uncle in passing. He'd been the family outcast, rumored to dabble in strange obsessions and collect oddities from traveling carnivals, an eccentric man whispered about but seldom visited. Now, that man had bestowed upon her his biggest obsession, with no instructions other than the cryptic note tucked into a dusty ledger. "You must keep the park open or darkness falls." She found that ominous, but her name was on the deed. She thanked the lawyer and walked him back to his car, a worn sedan conspicuously out of place where bumper cars and cheerful patrons might once have roamed. After he drove off, she took her first slow steps back through the park, alone except for the screeching gulls overhead and the crunch of litter underfoot. She had little money, hardly enough to restore the place, yet curiosity compelled her to unlock the old security office and begin exploring. The stale scent of dust assaulted her as fluorescent lights flickered to life. Stacks of manila folders, ancient logbooks, and a flickering computer screen greeted her. She spent the next several hours perched on a rickety stool, reading scraps of information about the park's final months of operation. Attendance had mysteriously plummeted, though no explanation was given. Maintenance logs became increasingly frantic, referencing inexplicable breakdowns in the rides. The final entries ended with a single repeated line, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Don't open after sundown." Elena felt an ominous shiver at those words. The memory of her uncle's cryptic note, combined with these logs, weighed heavily on her. She told herself it was just local superstition, the churn of gossip and rumor culminating in these unnerving warnings. Even so, she couldn't escape the uncanny feeling of eyes on her, as though the inanimate rides wanted her attention. Starcrest Amusement Park was small, just a handful of rides, a central roller coaster that soared over a drained lagoon, and a scattering of carnival booths, all sat in stillness. Elena wandered toward the Ferris wheel, its weathered gondolas swaying in the breeze. Weeds poked through the concrete. She touched one of the metal supports and felt the chill of rust seeping into her palm. A sense of nostalgia brushed over her. She recalled once as a girl being lifted high above the sparkling lights beside her mother. In that memory, the Ferris wheel had glowed with rainbow bulbs. Now it loomed like a faded shadow, a silent skeleton. She was about to move on when she heard a faint clank from somewhere near the gondolas. Perhaps a loose bolt settling? The breeze intensified, or so it seemed. She tried to brush off the uneasy sensation creeping up her spine. She realized with a sense of startled irony that she had inherited something she was both drawn to and frightened by. She resolved to at least see if any of the rides could still be coaxed back to life. If she was truly to honor Uncle Silas's condition of reopening, she'd have to do it in broad daylight, ignoring the more outlandish warnings. The following morning, Elena managed to track down Sam, a former park technician who had maintained the rides years ago. He lived in a cramped apartment on the edge of town and spoke with a near-decaying cynicism about the place he once loved. "Damn near killed me with stress," he growled when she asked him to come back for a day. "Things started going haywire, if you believe in that. Maintenance should be mechanical, But these rides, they broke themselves. I'd fix a latch in the morning, and by evening it would be undone. Gears would warp for no reason at all. Elena pressed him for more details. Sam simply shrugged. I can give it a look, see what's salvageable. But I'll only come in daylight. No chance I stay at night. He wouldn't elaborate on that last point, and she didn't press him. She was grateful for any help. Their next stop was the park's dilapidated control room. Sam tested voltage levels, rummaged through breaker boxes, and replaced blown fuses. Finally, some of the rides buzzed with weak energy. One of the carousels sputtered to life, its chipping, colorless horses bobbing slowly. The hum of electricity returned, some glimmer of what Starcrest might have once been. By late afternoon, Elena found herself in the manager's trailer, rummaging through old files. She discovered a chest of bizarre documents, diagrams and sketches of the park from a perspective she couldn't quite place. It looked like artificially scrawled maps with swirling lines that seemed to cut across each ride in cryptic shapes. Some pages bore a symbol shaped like a twisted infinity sign. Her uncle's name was all over the margins, along with drawings of laughing mouths and contorted faces. One page was especially unsettling, a rough sketch of the Ferris wheel at night, each gondola transformed into a grotesque face. A journal inside the chest confirmed her growing suspicion that Uncle Silas had been consumed by something more than just fantasies of amusement park grandeur. He described the rides as living entities, feeding on fear, especially once darkness fell. Notes described odd occurrences, automated laughter at midnight, the whir of engines turning when no switch had been flipped, illusions that manifested visitors' darkest anxieties. At one point, her uncle had penned, "The park is cursed, or perhaps blessed, with an energy that makes it see into human nightmares. Once the sun sets, the rides awake. They mirror the fears of those who come. The only thing that placates them is an audience. The rides must operate to keep them sated." Elena felt cold sweat beat on her forehead. This was the stuff of nightmares or elaborate mania. Yet the repeated pleas to censure the park, never closes forever, ignited dread inside her. She slammed the chest shut, the sound echoing too loudly in the near-empty trailer. She spent the day with Sam, beginning repairs on the Ferris wheel and ensuring safety checks. Though the structure was old, surprisingly few components needed replacement. Elena couldn't help but feel the wheel assisted them in its own strange way. Missing bolts turned up unexpectedly among the tools, and when the generator choked on half-burnt fuel, it somehow spluttered back to life without further meddling. As twilight neared, Sam abruptly set down his wrench. "I've done what I can," he said, eyes flicking skyward where the sun sank behind swirling clouds. "I'm going." He refused to stay past sundown, heading off with a hurried wave. Alone now, Elena stared at the horizon. She was bone-tired, but her heart thumped at the thought of staying to see if her uncle's claims held any truth. She walked the silent paths, hearing only the crunch of her footsteps. The last rays of light disappeared behind the mountains, and an instant hush fell over everything. The breeze staggered and died. The park stood like a heavy presence, laden tapestry, waiting. It began with the carousel. Its feeble overhead lights flickered, the twinkling bulbs frayed from years of neglect. Yet they now glowed with renewed intensity, too bright to be explained. Then a mechanical tune spilled into the air, warped and off-key, as the horses started to rotate on their own. Elena stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. She reminded herself that a faulty switch might have activated the carousel. Nonetheless, goosebumps prickled her arms. Each wooden horse's chipped paint took on the appearance of rotting flesh, at least to her anxious mind. The glossy eyes seemed to follow her. She tore her gaze away and retreated, only to hear a hiss from the roller coaster tracks, as if giant serpents slithered overhead. She glanced up. Nothing physically moved, but in the gloom the silhouettes of the empty cars seemed to twitch. An oppressive weight clamped her lungs. She considered running for the exit, but the entire park felt alive, waiting. She stopped at the distant ring of the Ferris wheel, which ground into motion. The wheel's gondolas created a slow dance against the starry sky. The air tasted of something feral, like ozone before a storm. The hush that had fallen made every creak resonate in her ears. Without explanation, Elena found herself stepping onto the Ferris wheel's platform. A voice in her head whispered not to do it, but morbid curiosity and some intangible pull spurred her forward. Each gondola was like a silent mouth, waiting to swallow a rider. She shivered, feeling the vibrations beneath her feet as the metal cogs engaged. She sat inside one gondola, the seat cold against her thighs. The wheel lurched. Darkness swallowed her as she ascended, leaving the safety of the ground. At first she saw only the emptiness below. Then it changed. Shadows pooled along the park walkways, forming shapes that writhed like living things. Squinting, she thought she saw silhouettes with wide, grinning mouths. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. At the top of the arc, a strangled lament drifted to her ears. She realized it was coming from her own throat. Fear battered her like a gale. In that moment, a memory rose unbidden. Being trapped in a small closet as a child, locked in darkness, left alone. She had been too terrified to speak, imagining shapes that slithered toward her with outstretched hands. Now, on the Ferris wheel, it was like that terror came alive again. The gondola walls seemed to shrink, pressing in on her, as if replicating that claustrophobic childhood scenario. She had to fight the compulsion to sabotage the lap bar and leap. Then it passed. The wheel made its descent, and the shapes dissolved. By the time she reached the ground, the ride's machinery slowed to a whisper. Finally it stopped altogether, leaving her breathless, shaking. She stumbled off, convinced there was more than just mechanical malfunction at play. Fleeing the Ferris wheel, she staggered down a deserted path and nearly collided with the funhouse entrance. Painted clowns with wide eyes beamed from the facade. Something in her mind insisted she step inside. That subtle compulsion drew her. On trembling legs she entered the mirrored passages. The overhead lights snapped on, in a dazzling zap, reflecting endless versions of herself in the corridor. Distorted images warped her face into nightmares, each reflection more horrifying than the last. Elongated arms, sunken eyes, twisted smiles. Then the reflection shifted beyond typical mirror illusions. For a moment, the image of her mother, who had died years ago, appeared in one mirror. The reflection beckoned with sorrowful eyes. Elena reached out, tears pooling, guilt welling up. She'd always felt she had never been there enough for her mother in her final months. But as she extended her hand, the reflection melted away, replaced by a stunted, bestial version of herself. It lunged at the glass. She recoiled. The corridor brightened to a glaring white, then everything went dark. Rubber floors squeaked under her shoes as she scrambled to find the exit. Laughter erupted from unseen speakers, or maybe from within the mirrors themselves. A guttural, mocking cackle. Finally, she found a door and burst into the night, gasping for air. The funhouse lights went dark behind her, as though suddenly losing interest. She had seen enough. Terror still throbbed in her veins. She wanted to flee the park, but as she sprinted toward the main gate, a memory of her uncle's note flickered. You must keep the park open, or darkness falls. She didn't fully understand what that meant. Had darkness already fallen? Did she risk unleashing something worse by leaving? She paused outside the battered gates. Even they seemed to protest her departure. Metal squeaked, refusing to open at first. When they finally gave way, a sense of relief washed over her as she rushed to her car. She cast one final glance at the silent rides. Something blinked among them, lights flickering across the roller coaster rails. Then she sped away into the cool, lonely night, heart hammering. The next afternoon, Elena visited the local library, diving into microfilm archives, old town newspapers, anything that could explain the park's strange phenomena. She discovered fragments of odd stories, visitors experiencing unexplained hallucinations, rumors that the park's owners dabbled in the occult, references to an incident from decades earlier when the park was forced to close after a tragic accident on the coaster. No one had told her that the park had been the scene of a thwarted murder. everything the park allowed the customer to do. A particularly disturbing article recounted how a mother insisted she had seen the face of her deceased child in the tilt-a-whirl's reflective surface. Another report described night security guards quitting in droves, petrified by footsteps following them long after closing. The last mention was an editorial piece lambasting Uncle Silas for not providing real answers about the park's closure. One line read, "He claims the park must never be abandoned at twilight. Has the old man gone mad, or is he a showman to the bitter end?" The text sank in. Maybe Silas was neither mad nor a showman. Maybe he was a caretaker, in a twisted sense. Determined to confront the truth, Elena returned to Starcrest at sunset. She carried a flashlight, the notes from Silas's journal, and a resolve that, mingled with dread, this time she walked systematically through each area. She started the generator, fueling the rides. She flipped the switches in the main control room, letting the neon lights sputter overhead. One part of her believed that if the rides were left running, perhaps they would not hunger for fear in the same way. Another part feared that she was simply giving them direct access to her own anxieties, but she recalled Silas's words. The only way to appease the park was to give it the attention it craved. Soon, music trickled across the empty thoroughfares. Continual tunes, whirring coaster tracks, the jingle of arcade games. But none of the madness from the previous night resurged. Instead, it was quieter, a subdued hum of mechanical life. She crept along, shining her flashlight at the rides, half expecting them to leap out at her, but they only continued their slow, continuous cycle. The night deepened, and she felt confident enough to investigate a locked maintenance shed near the roller coaster. Maybe she would find details about the accident that spawned so many rumors. Once inside, she discovered a battered file cabinet stuffed with old safety reports. At the bottom drawer, she found a thick binder labeled Incident 1983. The binder's contents confirmed that something catastrophic had happened on the coaster, a faulty restraint that flew open mid-ride, resulting in a passenger's death. However, the subsequent testimonies were strange. Multiple eyewitnesses claimed that the ride's safety bar had fastened itself shut at the station, but then undone itself mid-loop, an impossible mechanical failure. The victims' final screams had echoed throughout the park, some said calling out for help that never came, and afterward mechanics insisted the bar was still locked when the coaster returned. She flipped through more pages, her nerves on edge. Then, from the corner of her eye, she sensed movement. She whirled around as a shadow blotted out the doorway. The shape was vaguely humanoid, elongated, with a slithering motion. Final rays from the setting sun had vanished, leaving only the flickering bulbs outside. The figure never fully entered the shed, but she felt it watch her, denying her an easy escape route. With heart pounding, she gripped her flashlight and inched forward. In the half-light, the shape resembled a twisted reflection of her own body, same height, same hair length blowing in an invisible wind. She refused to cower. She took another step, forcing herself to lock eyes with whatever face it might have. There was none, just darkness. Yet her reflection shimmered where the face should be, as though she stared into a warped mirror. A wave of dread crashed over her, but she pressed on, blinking back tears. Then, with a faint pop, the overhead bulb in the shed blew out. Elena gasped, pitched forward. By the time she recovered her balance, the doorway was empty. The presence was gone. She fled outside, scanning the grounds. The park was quiet again, the ride still turning. She wondered if that shadow was the park's way of testing her. Was it challenging her attempt to keep things running? Night after night, Elena repeated her delicate routine. She would arrive at dusk, turn on the lights and rides, then quietly walk the grounds, making sure everything continued to operate. The illusions persisted, but never again did they escalate to raw terror. The funhouse let out random bursts of laughter. The coaster roared overhead, an invisible load of passengers. The carousel mannequins swiveled their heads imperceptibly when she wasn't looking. Occasionally, she glimpsed that shadow figure watching her from corners, as if ensuring she upheld her task. Days slipped into weeks. Her nightmares intensified whenever she tried to sleep in her modest motel room. She'd see the Ferris wheel's gondolas opening like hungry mouths, the funhouse mirrors warping into infinite corridors. Yet she kept returning to the park, certain that leaving it truly abandoned after sundown would unleash something more horrific than what she faced each night. She tried to bring in visitors, anything to revitalize the park and break its malevolent cycle, but the townspeople had long lost interest, or were too frightened by the rumors. She managed to lure a handful of curious thrill-seekers one evening, offering free admission to test the rides by night. They wandered the park, half laughing, half nervous. At first, everything went smoothly, but the illusions soon targeted them. A young man screamed that he saw all the roller coaster cars fill with skeletons. Another claimed a carnival booth spat dozens of plastic eyes at her. By the end, the group fled, leaving Alina alone with a deeper sense of dismay. Then, on the night of a new moon, the illusions grew nearly intolerable. Clouds swallowed the stars. The darkness felt tangible, pressing at the edges of the park's neon glow. She felt cold winds slither across her neck as she double-checked the generator. It had enough fuel for the night, she always made sure of that, yet fear gnawed at her. She sensed that the park's appetite was growing. Silas's notes had warned that if the place did not receive enough spectators, it would desperately amplify the illusions. As she walked by the coaster, the pang of her childhood memory returned. That locked closet, the claustrophobia, the suffocating darkness. She heard whispered pleas in the wind. They sounded like her mother, calling out Elena's name. With trembling steps, she ascended the coaster station ramp, shining her flashlight through the empty cars. A stench of metal and old upholstery hit her. She paused at the car where the fatal accident supposedly happened. In a flash, she recalled the binder's description of the restraint malfunction. Heart pounding, she thought she saw bloodstains beneath layers of chipped paint. Then the overhead lights flickered, the track rumbled. The coaster's engine engaged on its own, the chain lift pulling the empty train forward. Shocked, she stepped back, watching as each car clicked up the incline. Something urged her to board, as if the seat was calling her name. She refused, biting back a scream. Suddenly, the ride sped down the first drop, vanishing into a tunnel. She heard a renewed shriek, as if the entire train was full of tormented souls. It looped around, soared into the night sky, then rattled back into the station. The air stilled. She inched closer, compelled by a dreadful curiosity. The cars were still empty, but each restraint sat wide open, beckoning. Elena slammed the controls to off, electricity crackling. The machine whined in protest. For a moment, it seemed the coaster would fight her. Then the chain lift ceased, leaving only the overhead lights flickering. By the time she returned to the main control room, she felt her resolve slipping. She clutched a letter from Silas's belongings, reading it for the 20th time. "I've done all I can. Pass the torch on if you must, but never abandon the rides. They need watchers. They feed on fear if left hungry." She realized the park demanded an owner who would stay vigilant. Her uncle had tried to maintain that equilibrium, though it destroyed his life. She sank into the dusty control chair, tears burning her eyes. Was she doomed to a lifetime of appeasing twisted machinery? She could not sell it. No buyer would keep it open at night, not if they discovered its secret. If she allowed it to crumble, would the nightmares break free into the surrounding town? A strangled sob escaped her. Then an epiphany struck. The illusions escalated when visitors were scarce. The park thrived on fear, but what if it also craved wonder, excitement, the intangible energies of human emotion? Perhaps she could transform it, attract enough people with daylight events to keep that equilibrium, provide the park with positive energy rather than letting it starve. She wiped her tears and stood. She would attempt a new approach. If ironically the park fed on human engagement, she would not abandon it to fester. Instead, she would attempt to rebrand Starcrest as a haunted park attraction, leaning on the rumors, but ensuring no one was left alone after dark. Safety protocols, staff, structured night tours, carefully orchestrated to funnel excitement instead of raw terror. Maybe, just maybe, that would placate the lurking horrors. 1 month later, Alina found herself more exhausted than ever, but a new sign stood at the entrance. Starcrest, dare to enter at night. A handful of intrepid tourists now trickled in. Beneath the bright neon glow, guided tours meandered through the rides, their hosts telling ghost stories, half true, half invented. Real illusions occasionally bled in mirrors, warping and rides chiming unexpectedly, but the crowds believed it was all part of the show. They screamed, they laughed, they filmed each strange occurrence with shaky phone cameras. And the park responded. The illusions still surfaced, but no longer singled out Alina with savage force. Whenever the twisted reflections emerged, they dissolved quickly under the collective awe of the group. The rides had an audience. They were not starved of emotion. Over time, Alina noticed fewer horrifying apparitions during her solo rounds. The rides still occasionally blinked to life on their own, but the presence watching her seemed almost appreciative, if such a term could be applied. She felt, for the first time, that she was not alone in controlling the park. It cooperated with her in its own eerie way. She would forever bear the weight of this guardianship, but perhaps it was worth it. She had found a precarious balance, a nightly dance between wonder and dread, where Starcrest was neither fully awakened nor entirely dormant. And as she walked the paths at closing time, hearing faint echoes of children's giggles mixed with adult gasps, she sensed the park was satiated, at least for now. Even those rusted, shadowy corners seemed to cast less menacing silhouettes in the flickering lamplight. Till, each night as she locked up, the air carried an undertone of caution. She knew that if the laughter stopped, if the crowds vanished, if fear overshadowed wonder, then the rides would again come alive in their darkest form. And when that happened, she would be there, tethered to the haunted legacy her uncle had passed on, determined to keep Nightmare Park from unleashing its true terrors upon the unwary world.